Good morning, viewers. Welcome to another webinar in the Drug Advisory Council series of webinars on important subjects in the fight against drugs in this country and in particular around the world. So today, our broadcast is a Pan-Pacific broadcast. We are having people tune in and share the information today that you'll hear from right around Australia, coast to coast, including Western Australia. And with the time difference of 3 hours, I congratulate the viewers from Western Australia for getting up early to participate in this webinar. And with a time difference in Queensland of an hour as well, a little bit earlier for them on this Saturday morning. And of course, our very, very special guest speaker, Pamela McColl, comes to us from Vancouver. So we truly have a Pan-Pacific broadcast today. My name is Jan Kronberg, and I'm the National President of the Drug Advisory Council. And the Drug Advisory Council is pursuing registration as a charity with donatable gift register status. And in time to come, the people who'll be making donations to us will be able to claim that as a tax deduction. So this has been the focus of our endeavours during 2022, and coming out of COVID, broadcasting webinars just as the one today. So welcome to everybody. And I want to encourage you on two fronts, not only to pay attention and take on board the contribution from Pamela McColl coming live to you from Vancouver, because Pamela has got some really profound information to share with you. But to also take advantage of the opportunity that in the second half of our time, you'll be able to text a question to me on 0447 160 990, and that's at the bottom of the screen now. If you text a question to me, I'll be able to put that to Pamela, and so those questions are most welcome. Now, because when you've made your booking for this webinar, there wasn't a fee to join the webinar, but if you're in a position to do so, you could take note of the web address down the bottom, Drug Advisory Council australia.org.au/donate, and you could then support our work, because undertaking these broadcasts does cost money, and we're not a charity yet, so we operate on limited means. So whatever you can do to help us, that is most welcome and in fact essential. I just want to flag the fact that we'll be having our next webinar at the end of January, and the topic of that convened by one of the patrons of the Drug Advisory Council, Dr. Murad Ibrahim, who's a respiratory specialist. He'll be talking on vaping and the condition that he refers to as marijuana lung, and that will be a profound opportunity for everybody to take in what this respiratory specialist has to share with us, and it's an area of great concern in terms of what he sees in his daily practice. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is move to giving you some introduction to our guest speaker, Pamela McColl, who is waiting patiently in her beautiful home in Vancouver, and for her it's Friday afternoon. And so I'd just like to acknowledge the fact that yesterday was Remembrance Day, and we honour and remember the fallen of all wars, but especially the silencing of the guns on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, I think singling the end of World War I. So Pamela McColl does live in Vancouver, and she likes to have things described in this way, that she's worked on what she calls the marijuana file for over a decade, primarily in Canada, where she was heavily involved in the challenge to a Bill C45, the Cannabis Act, before the Canadian Parliament in 2018. Now, Pamela is also the author of a really important book, The Pied Pipers of Pot, Protecting Youth from the Marijuana Industry. And I have a copy of it here with me, so you can see what it looks like. And if you have a look at how I've marked up this book, it's become a very important resource for me. It's a profound book, and if you are in a position to read this book, you would be just as disposed as we are with the Drug Advisory Council to make sure anybody you know never takes on marijuana because of the dangers, especially to the developing embryos and the developing brain, should it be a young person who starts young. So Pamela will share information contained in there with us. Now, in her challenge to the legalization of marijuana, she focuses on the evidence provided by science that establishes harm and advocates for vastly improved education to counter the reckless messaging by the industry and who have vested interests in legalizing this product. And we all know that when you want answers to things as to why there's enthusiasm about something, you always follow the money. This is part of the momentum. Now, I'm going to invite Gabriel, and I give thanks on your behalf to Gabriel Tipnis, who's our technical specialist to providing this broadcast for us today, and the comfort for those of us who are speaking with you. So, Gabriel, if we could see Pamela now, that'd be lovely. Pamela, good afternoon to you, and welcome to a Saturday morning in Melbourne. It's lovely to have you join us today. And on behalf of all of the viewers and my organisation, the Drug Advisory Council of Australia, I thank you for participating in this webinar, which is being broadcast out through YouTube and will become a resource and reside on YouTube for those who can't participate with us today. So welcome, Pamela, and thank you very much in anticipation of what you'll share with us today, Pamela.
Lovely to be here. Thank you. And good morning, Saturday in Australia. I was thinking about how I wanted to approach this, and I've spent more than 10 years working on this file, as Jan mentioned, mainly because I was outraged over the audacity of the industry and the lies and the deceit and the perversion of their campaign. And that's a word I chose to define their activity because I think it's very accurate. They took things that they thought that we would use against them and turned it upon us. And they did it in a very calculated way. So I started off working really in anti-tobacco, tobacco prevention. And I read a couple of books, and I, of course, was part of the campaign going on in Canada through the Prime Minister to legalize marijuana. And I was offended by the deceit. And so what I did was I went and I met all these people around the world, leading doctors and scientists and researchers in Australia, in Britain, in the United States. I introduced myself. I built a community of people that I could relate to and ask questions of. And then in Canada, I found two very prominent researchers who, one of them was actually nominated for a Nobel Prize. And I went to them and they said, you're right. The Canadians are not having the conversation they need to have about this drug, and they're not being educated properly. And so I ended up going to the United Nations in Vienna, the UN ODC, and then in New York. And again, I met a lot of people. And so I set myself up, through the internet and everywhere else to have this great resource. And I do not have a medical background. I do not have a science background. I have an art background. I'm a publisher, a writer. I was an art consultant for 25 years. I'm a historian. My undergraduate degree is in history. So here I am in the world of neuroscience and marijuana. But I wanted to say to all of you who are working on this that we all come to it out of a concern for the health of our children, our grandchildren, and our society. And whatever it is you have in your skill set that you can apply to this, you do not need to be a scientist, and you do not need to be a neuroscientist or a medical professional. You just need to be able to read the science, understand how to read a scientific research study to see if it's actually a legitimate study, who funded it, the bias, if there is one, where it's published, those kind of things. And then to look for the real scholars on the topic, like Wayne Hall from Australia. So if you can find that community, and I certainly am approachable, I know Jan certainly is, that you can build your community and find the people who have the skills to be able to equip you to be a great advocate. And I think that it was a really interesting exercise for me to do. And the fact that I did testify at House of Commons in Canada, I did testify, and I helped write speeches in the House of Commons on this. And I just think that I tried to make a difference. And I don't know if I did in Canada, but I certainly think I've made a difference in stopping a study in the University of Washington that was recruiting women who used marijuana for pregnancy. I spent 4 months, tearing that study and that research apart because it was, in my opinion, not legitimate. And it went to the White House, our complaint. So, I think the big message I think I wanted to share this morning was that we all have a role to play. And I think one of the problems that I've witnessed in our advocacy is that we sometimes forget our role and what our skill set is. And we hesitate sometimes, and sometimes we don't apply our best skills. So I know my great friend, Dr. Philip Drum, is a PhD pharmacologist, and I help him write things. I'm a writer, he helps me with science. So that's the kind of, I think, interaction that we need more of to be successful, because we are up against a behemoth. I mean, these people have so much money and so many intelligent marketing people working for them that they've been able to bamboozle the American public, the Canadian public, and I think I'm sure they've bamboozled a few Australians into believing that this drug is safer than alcohol, that it is a happy drug. Nobody's ever been violent on it. Nobody's ever driven a car and hurt anybody on it. They just made this incredible myth around this drug, and they've sold that to the public. Now, the fact that our politicians haven't fought back hard enough, that they haven't listened to the science, I think is really sad. I think that science has to rule the day. I think it has to be the forefront. But we have a great deal of science. We have thousands and thousands of studies in the United States with billions of dollars spent on researching marijuana. Anybody who says we don't have that is not telling the truth. And we have science on, as Jan mentioned, the developing brain of the youth. We have the science on marijuana in pregnancy and the impact on the unborn child and on the child who survives, and the damage of their cognitive development and other aspects of their health. We also have all the science we need to show that using marijuana in pregnancy can lead to low birth weight. Low birth weight babies is the number one cause of infant mortality. So if that's not enough, we certainly have all the male reproductive health issues. And that, to me, I think that's one of the biggest pieces, because I think that's so incredibly sad that young men do not understand the risk of using marijuana to their reproductive health. I think that they have a right to know that that drug could have the effect of creating either testicular cancer, sperm morphology, or having DNA damage that could impact not only their children, but their grandchildren. I think they have a right to know that. I think governments have an obligation to tell them that. Now in Canada, Health Canada is our health watchdog. It's an agency, and it put out a report in 2016, and it said in the consumer report on cannabis, marijuana, THC, that men should not use if they wish to have children. That is the exact language of the Government of Canada, Health Canada. That was their bulletin. And yet this very government went out in 2018 and legalized it without telling the public that. There were no billboards with that. There were no brochures. There was no communication. Now, I went to a hearing over this with the task force, with a former Minister of Health of the Government of Canada, with MPs from the Government of Canada, with lawyers from Health Canada sitting on the board. And I presented 6 hours of testimony, including Health Canada documents that stated that men should not use marijuana if they wish to have children. Wish is their word. I'm not changing it. That's exactly how it's worded. And I turned to the lawyer for Health Canada and I said, how do you legalize a drug when you yourselves know this and it's substantiated by science? And the reply I got from the chair of the committee was, we're not here to discuss if, we're here to discuss how. And then at the end of the meeting, the former Minister of Health of the Government of Canada came up to me and said, I just sealed the meeting and no one will ever see anything you just said. And I had that verified. So everything I brought with me, all the testimony, all the petitions, all the science, which was about 17 inches high in paperwork, I had photocopied, I brought this binder and I placed on the record, will never be seen by any Canadian. So, and Dr. Stuart Rees from Australia, I got him on the list of people to speak at the House of Commons. When he sent in what he was going to say in his 10 minutes, his allowed 10-minute speech, the House of Commons of Canada, they uninvited him. And yet they chose in his place a pot lobbyist who was high when testifying at the House of Commons. And when one of the MPs said, are you high? He said, yes, I'm high now and I'll be high when I leave, and there's nothing you can do about it. So, it's been an interesting ride. I must say, I wrote my book and I wrote it. I was actually in London. I was doing some work over in London, and I was going from cafe to cafe trying to finish that book because I had to get it out of my head. I had so much information and so much passion that I had to get it onto paper so that somebody could see it and that I could go to it and refer to it as well, right? And I can't tell you how many times I've turned to the harm reduction section and my criticism of harm reduction and had somebody, use it in media or recite it. It's been one of the more frequently visited pages in my book. So it's I think my children are always wondering why I got involved in this. I think my friends, a lot of people don't want to talk about marijuana and policy. I just couldn't sit by and do nothing and watch people get wealthy and harm the health of others. It's against my DNA. It's against everything I think. I'm a child's rights activist primarily, so I get concerned about children and pregnancy and marijuana and pregnancy. I also get very concerned about the use of marijuana in the home and the fact that Canada and Justin Trudeau, our prime minister, broke the rights to the child treaty when he legalized marijuana, section 33, and nobody really seemed to care. It's the most ratified piece of human rights legislation ever signed. Every single country except for the United States and one other country signed that document. And it specifically says that, drugs are not to be put into the home of children. And yet it was in Canada. So these children are exposed to the use of marijuana in their homes, to accidental poisonings, to the impact of marijuana use by parents who, if you look at the Texas homicide data, the leading drug for people who kill their children is marijuana, much more than alcohol or cocaine. And the fact that the society doesn't understand the risks between marijuana use and violent outcomes, and the violent outcome, including on children, I think is a dereliction of our elected officials' duty. And I also think the driving is a big, big piece, but my main focus has been children. And that's why I called my book The Pied Pipers of Pot, because I think the industry, just like tobacco, set out to get our kids, and they set out to get the population addicted. And the fact that they were marketing to pregnant women or putting out lactation cookies with THC for new moms, I think is really appalling. I think that people should stand up and do something about that. As far as Canada, I mean, we have right now a review going on. It was a year late getting started on the Cannabis Act. And I don't know if we'll ever see the data that we need to be able to really analyze this. It's all very politicized, and it's very much controlled by the industry and the lobbies. So I don't think that we're ever really going to get the truth. I really don't. We're so far behind as far as giving out data, especially compared to the Americans who seem to be able to do that. It was interesting in their election last week that marijuana was on the ballot in 6 states and only 2 passed. So that's good to know that 4 states pushed back pretty hard and they were able to, keep it out of their states. I think there's a tide turning. I mean, if you study narcotics history like I have, there's a pendulum and it swings from side to side. And a lot of us hope that it'll center somehow, that we'll just not have to do those wild swings, right? But it looks like we're turning it around. It's so bad now. And especially in Vancouver, it's such a dangerous city. We had an RCMP, a 31-year-old RCMP officer stabbed to death the other day in a park. We've had people mugged on the streets with knives and hammers and all kinds of crime. It's becoming a very dangerous place. And I don't think the public will put up with that too much more. I think that they'll push back. So, that means more policing and I don't know what we do with all these people who are now on drugs. This is a really sad thing, to have more and more people addicted to marijuana, because we know it leads to homelessness in some cases because they can't keep a job, they're addicted. It's just a really sad thing. We know the link between marijuana and suicide ideation and activation. It's just the public is so ill-informed. And that's where I started 12 years ago, 10 years ago, was just on this whole, why don't we know? Why aren't we being told of the science, which we have? I mean, Canada alone was researching marijuana in the 1970s. I mean, one member of Health Canada was researching it solely for almost 10 years in the 70s. So to say we don't have science is completely ludicrous. We don't need a dump truck of science. We have key science, like on the low birth weight or testicular cancer or, the suicide ideation activation. We have that. We have it on PTSD. I mean, here, Veterans Day, these poor veterans. I think that's one of the most tragic, horrible situations is to push marijuana on veterans for PTSD. It creates depression, anxiety, and suicide ideation. It doesn't help. There's no science that shows that. It shows the contrary. So, and yet our government funds that. I think that's really, really unfortunate. So it's been a really interesting time. There was one time when I was working on my book and I actually burnt a whole bunch of files in my backyard on my farm. And I just thought, I can't do this anymore. This is just as dangerous. I'm getting death threats. I had the industry threaten me. I just, don't know if I want to do that. But then you just can't not work on something if you care as much and you see it the way I see it, And so, I do continue to work on this, and it's just something I really, really care about. And I think in the future, I'd like to do more, connecting again, like I have. I used to have a wonderful connection in London, Mary Pratt, who did a great job, but she's retired now. And, it just, to find the people and to connect with them. I connect with people every day. I used to do it much, much more. But I'm available, if somebody needs something, or I know I've got involved in lots of letters and lots of campaigns, and, I'm trying to keep up to date. It's an interesting journey because I think, I don't know, there have been times when you can get really, really angry about it all and you can sort of get frustrated, everything else, but you have to continue to have hope and think that we'll get through this. We'll figure this out. There's more of us there's more people that don't do drugs than there are people who do drugs. We are the vast majority. And it doesn't always look like that when you walk downtown and there's people lying around the streets and you hear all these things in the news about crime and all these things, but there are vastly more people who don't use. And we don't need to revolutionize or, educate these people to the point where they can, do a dissertation on it. We just need to agitate them enough that they say no, that we need to make the connection and connect the dots between marijuana use and violence, marijuana use and driving fatalities, marijuana use and school dropouts, marijuana use and suicide, marijuana use and cannabis hyperemesis syndrome taking up our healthcare budgets. Those are the kind of dots we need to connect. And the more we can do that, we just need to agitate this massive majority that we have to go, no, I'm not going to vote for that. They don't need to be any more than that. That's what we need them to do. And so finding people, who are willing to talk to you about marijuana policy and doing it without anger and without trying to, you have to be very strategic because they just glaze over often if you give them too much information. And I think it's more important to find out what is actually important to them. Are they going to be a new grandmother? I had a situation recently where a baby was born deformed, and someone asked me, was it because the mother was using marijuana? What a difficult situation to be in for a young woman to realize that what you just did harmed your child. Like, I, as a woman, think that that's just tragic, that somebody in her life, her world, hadn't been able to convince her before she had this baby to stop drinking alcohol and using marijuana, right? So I think you just have to find your way into these conversations however you can. Driving high is certainly a conversation you can have with teenagers and everyone else because it affects everyone, pedestrians, passengers, other drivers. I certainly would be seeing if I don't have teenagers right now, I have adult children, but I'd be sitting them down and saying, if you're using marijuana, you are not getting the keys to a car. Flat out. No drug testing, none of that, just none. No car. You're not going to do that because they'd ruin your life. They'd ruin someone else's life. They'd ruin their own lives. Like, you have to take these things seriously. So I think finding a way into these conversations with people without them just going, you just hate marijuana. I've had that said to me, so what's with you and marijuana? Like, what's with this? What's with this? And it's been very frustrating. And if you throw science and data at them, they just glaze over too. So I have a new book coming out, probably in a year's time. And I've been working on it, but I have some other work to work on. But I am going to go out there again, and I'm going to do this last book that I've got because I have stacks of paper and research, and I have a really good theme, and I'm going to try and hit it. And I think in a year's time, we may see some of this starting to roll back because the public just will take so much damage, and they'll start like in the 1990s. I mean, actually the 1980s, they pushed back. They just said no. The parents movement came along and said, no, no, we're not doing this. And they started to fund politicians who actually would take it seriously. So a lot of people would say in the American government, it was Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan. No, it wasn't. It was the parents movement who funded the political campaign of Ronald Reagan. And with billions of dollars, and said, you go get the drugs, right? So I think that's what we have to do, is we have to get active and try and not get frustrated and try not to lose our momentum and take our gains. Like the Americans pushing back on 4 states this week was good. That's a good day for us. And the science will keep pouring in, and you can cherry pick science to death. I mean, you can go on PubMed and you could find some crummy little study somewhere that shows that, CBD is good for dogs. But if you look at the legitimate science, no, it's not. It's it's just try your best to be an advocate and pick your battles and know your skill set. If you're really good at writing, go help a doctor do an interview. I just wrote an article for a newspaper for a doctor. Like whatever you do well, some of us are great at fundraising. Just that is my advice, because I've seen so many people tripping over themselves, trying to do something in this campaign and just falling flat, and then getting all discouraged and then going, oh, I'm a professor of English. And I'm going, oh, you could have been editing everybody's newspaper letters to the editors for us. That would have been great. That's a skill set. So I think that's a big part of this, is we have not been a very coordinated group. We have had not very good leadership, and we haven't had a good campaign. We really haven't. And they have had the best. And I'm talking the marketing team of the likes of Starbucks. Like they pinched all the great people from some of the great corporations of America and paid them a fortune to come up with a campaign. And their campaigns have been brilliant, absolutely brilliant, starting from normalization and normal, because the leading lobby group in the United States, Normal, right? They knew we were going to come after them like we did in tobacco with denormalization. That's the gold standard, prevention strategy, denormalization. So what do? They came up with normalization and this whole stigma, normalizing drug use. It came at us before we could get to them. That's how smart they are. And they've done it every time. Like COVID, they had studies on THC cured COVID. They did. They just get out there. So it's it's going up against them is very challenging. And as I said earlier, I certainly have had death threats, specifically from the industry, which I took very seriously. But it didn't stop me, because I'm sure Jan appreciates this too. You can't know what we know and care like we do and go home. It just doesn't really work. You just implode somewhere. You need to participate and keep at it. And if you need to take a break, like I have sometimes, that's okay too. But I think keeping our sense of direction here and just remembering that the pendulum does swing and it will come back through, and we will somehow help these people who've been pushed on this drug, like we will other drugs, as a compassionate, person. I certainly would like to see all these people, find recovery and have great lives. But the horrible part about marijuana is it destroys your happiness factor, and that doesn't come back. So the science on that is probably the saddest, I guess, of all of it. That it destroys your ability to feel happy to the extent that you could before you became, a regular user of marijuana. So the CBD piece, we probably don't have time tonight, but this morning, but the CBD piece is a huge piece too. And I think that the real quackery, is rampant in that conversation and needs to be checked too. So I think that's all I need to say, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Pamela, thank you very much for that really profound account of your experience and sharing some of the absolute downside and the terror when evil prevails. And it's my lasting concern that it certainly is a growth industry here through the notion of normalisation. Before we move to questions, I'll just remind people of the number that you can text questions through to 0447 160 990. And just to remind you, there's also an opportunity to visit our website, drugadvisorycouncilaustralia.org.au/donate. And you can pledge a donation to us, which will be most welcome and I assure you put to the very best use. Pamela, thank you on behalf of everybody for that series of revelations. I'm interested to know, upon reflection, when you were involved in the hearing, the 6-hour hearing, where you prepared and you shared with me how it was a mental and physical and emotional ordeal for you to make that contribution to the people of Canada on a sustained period of time of 6 hours, and to find that your information couldn't be shared or disseminated. were there any people there who came up to you afterwards and said, that's the way it is, or that's politics, or you should be careful? I mean, upon reflection, it just seems like such a brutal experience. Can you just share some of your feelings and reflections on that part? This is the the House of Commons there in Ottawa. I'm correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah, this was like the task force was made up of 3 MPs and the former health minister. And what was really interesting was that I went to a hotel in Vancouver and I asked for the meeting and they said, there's no meeting here. And I went, well, this is on my invitation. And then they said, well, there's nothing here. And I thought, well, what's all this about? And there was a man just walking out to get a taxi and he was on a cell phone. I heard him say, oh, they've changed the meeting to so-and-so. And so I heard him and I said, are you going to that? And he went, he was going to the same meeting I was. If I hadn't heard him, they were going to not even let me come. Like they were going to make it as though I hadn't showed up, right? So I show up and the room's full of all these people that are all pro. And I got jeered. I got stared at. It was awful. I walked the main streets back to my car. I didn't take any shortcuts. It was awful, really awful. But no, there's all kinds of other people in Health Canada they've shut down and fired and all kinds of stuff ripped up and shredded and gag orders and nope, very serious stuff and very wrapped up in the political world. Very, very nefarious, like really ugly stuff. So, but that's kind of the state of Canada at the moment. We don't have a very good government, I must say. In my opinion.
Well, if they haven't been able to see through what's actually going on, they must be part of the process. So I suspect dark forces are at play, and that seems to prevail where a lot of decisions to accommodate marijuana in all its forms and all its delivery systems. It just seems to be that people are turning a blind eye to the science that you stress and to the consequences. And in time to come, maybe there'll be like Nuremberg trials for crimes against humanity because, what they're actually doing to entire populations with the pushing of this drug and getting people to accept its normalisation is really very, very dark and very, very sinister. And of course, there's a lot of money, which is often measured in billions. It's probably approaching $1 trillion if the truth be known. And so that makes it unstoppable and breathtakingly well resourced and plenty of islands and yachts to throw at people who they need to accelerate its acceptance. Another question before we go to those that have come through, Pamela, is in your book you referred to the work of Keith Stroop, who headed up Normal in California, and how he revealed the fact that to make marijuana seem more acceptable, the course would be to strap on a prefix to it and call it medicinal marijuana. Are you in a position to comment on that concept?
Well, there is no such thing as medical marijuana. There's marijuana for medical purposes. And I think that that's part of our problem as a campaign is that we don't use denormalization language properly. We should never be calling it marijuana, medical marijuana. There is no such thing as medical marijuana. That's impossible, right? It's like there are compounds, Epidiolex or Sativex or Marinol or Dronabinol that are a component of the marijuana plant that are made into a medicine, but there's no such thing as it's like saying a willow tree is medicine. That's ridiculous. We have aspirin, right? So we need to talk about it. I would always call it marijuana for medical purposes. But the science, there isn't any. There's no science that shows benefits. That's just the industry coming out. And so they played us and they played our compassion. They started in California and in Canada, and they played our compassion, that these people who said that they got better, like quackery, right? 19th century quackery, they allowed them to have it. And the medical profession was furious, still is furious. And I know people like Dr. Stuart Gitlow, just you can't even say the word around them. You just get so upset. So it's just a big hoax. It's as Patrick Kennedy said, it's the hoax of the 21st century,
Yes, I'd love to have dialogue with Patrick Kennedy, and you and I might talk about that in time to come. I'm just going to put some questions to you now. This one is from Kathy, and she congratulates you on the interview, Pamela. And she said here, will Pamela share her hotel and experience in her upcoming book? I'm not sure what Kathy means by hotel and experience in her upcoming book, but I can't elaborate on that. Perhaps Kathy can send me another message to top that up a bit. So I guess where you are now, since having written The Pied Pipers of Pot, Protecting Youth from the Marijuana Industry, in your upcoming book, the brutal way you've been treated and the reactions which have been frightening and severe towards your work, would you be sharing that in the book? I think that probably will be helpful to Kathy.
I don't think so. I think I know so what I'm writing about that we knew this and we've known this for decades. Like there were major political figures and scientists and spokespeople who knew the science. They knew this. And how did they get away with this? Like, if we knew this in the 70s, we knew the risks, the marijuana risks and harms, what happened? Like, there were people standing up on podiums in the 1970s telling people this is really bad on the youth brains and we're witnessing this and we've seen science and everything else. What happened? How did we not hang on to that? Like, how did we go so far on this path with this industry? I don't understand that. And there were some major periodicals and media announcements back then that I don't know. I'm still researching it, how this all happened. I think it all comes back to politics. It just comes back to a liberal agenda that the cannabis culture concept, right? That it's us or them, it's anti-authority, it's anti-police, it's I'll do whatever I darn well feel like, and you don't get to tell me what to do with my body. It's a libertarian kind of concept as well. It's forgetting that we're part of a shared society, that we're part of a civilization, that what we do does matter. COVID taught us that. If anything ever did, COVID taught us that what you do matters to the rest of us. And, I just think that's the big piece that I need to write about, because I've got some really great stuff and some whistleblowers that I've got great testimony from that knew it back in the 70s and 80s. And they told people, like, look at the document I mentioned from 2016 even. How could the government of Canada say men should not use if they want to have children and then, or wish to have children, and then no, don't tell anybody that? Like, I think that's dereliction of duty. But I'd like to get every single MP to sign an affidavit that they've been told. I've told you.
That's a very good move. I've got a lot of questions coming through, so
okay.
I'll put another one to you. Pamela, thank you very much for your presentation. This is from Terry. Could you comment with a bit more detail on the link between marijuana use and violence? I don't think many people would be aware of this. Marijuana is the happy drug, isn't it? Very pejoratively put here.
Right. No, it's not at all. And the science on marijuana and psychotic break is very substantial. The link between marijuana use and schizophrenia, early onset schizophrenia in some cases, and bipolar, which can lead to violence, not in all cases and not all the time, of course, but unmedicated. And we all know that if you're hearing voices telling you to jump off a bridge or kill someone, it's a very serious situation. So there's a lot of science on it. It's definitely being talked about a lot now because we've seen so many crimes and mass murders where they've tracked it back and the person was on marijuana. And a lot of this child violence, this violence in the home of children, and this link to marijuana. So we've got not only the science, but we have the data, especially out of the United States on that, especially out of Texas. So hope that answers that.
Thank you, Pamela. And I could actually underpin that, because one of the things I brought today is a summation of an article that the Australian journalist Miranda Devine had posted in the New York Post in July this year, as the result of the mass shootings in the US. And the pattern of mass killers equals alienated young male stoners. And it's a fantastic laying out on the effects of marijuana on the adolescent brain, how it's more potent and dangerous today, and unfortunately the denial in the face of established fact. There's some of the headings, and it highlights the killers who their background, I quote here, has been airbrushed by his lawyer, claiming that his family are scapegoated for gun control failures. His life did not fit the description of wonderful, suffering from neglect. He'd lost his job, believed in stuff that goes along with the psychedelic rap and drugs. A former friend who knew him from 14 to 17 described him as an isolated stoner who completely lost touch with reality. Who knew him from the age of 14 to 17. How profound that a young person at that age lost his capacity to face reality. These are, every one of those tragedies is just resonates, and I have to commend Miranda Devine, our Australian journalist, there. We have a question from Dr. Roger Newbury, who's one of the Drug Advisory Council's esteemed patrons, and he said, to put to you, Pamela, how do we deal with the creeping legalization of cannabinoids?
That would be the $60 question. This is the whole thing. This is really, you need to mobilize, but you need to do it in this way that's effective. And you need to do it by just getting the information out there as much as you can and being relevant to the person you're talking to and the audience. You just have to go there and try your best. I write letters to the editor all the time. Whatever you can do, and bring it up in conversation with people. You'll be astounded, I think, how often people will sort of, I didn't know any of that, or have like really good resources to send to people. And probably the very best way is to get great politicians out there somehow. You need to find those people who are, there used to be a thought that you could find somebody. I know in Britain, there's been some senior government people or elected officials who've had children commit suicide or other accidents or whatever from marijuana, and they've been really vocal. And so sometimes people say that you need a victim, you need somebody who's got a personal tragedy. I don't know if that's true. I think that just finding somebody who can be educated properly and who has an interest in it and can connect the dots. We've got to connect. That's our problem, is this disconnect. People go violence, marijuana, what's that got to do with it? They don't connect. When you connect it with data and science, you can do it. And then I think it's just, it's tough. It's really tough. And in Canada, we tried our best, but it was just, the cards weren't there. There was just so much propaganda and deceit and so much wealth going on. The Senate was corrupted. The Canadian Senate, it was appalling to see that. It's very sad. But I just get out there and do what you can. And Jan and other wonderful people are trying their best to help, that's for sure. But yeah.
Pamela, thank you very much for that. Yes, we are trying really hard, and the team of the Drug Advisory Council, a splendid team of people doing their very best across many fronts and many professional disciplines. And also we have a unifying coalition called the Task Force for Drug Prevention, which incorporates other anti-drug bodies around Australia, and that's a developing entity, and certainly underpins our direction and strengthens our resolve, and gives us a bit more collective grunt. So we're working on that, but we are not in a position to match the funding that washes over this debate from the other side, where they've got access to hundreds of millions of dollars, possibly billions, for every phase of their promotional side of things. Now, I have a message here from a woman who's doing doctoral studies in health sciences, and but she's also got a background in the law, and she's been a bail justice, and it sort of seeing the effect of drugs on the individual for some time. So, and she says that there needs to be a lot of documentation. There's a statement before the question, congratulating you on a great talk, and lots of hand clapping, and saying that there needs to be an updating in terms of the impact of marijuana as opposed to the effects of alcohol, because it's just a gesture where it's waved away. Oh well, alcohol is much more dangerous, and we accommodate alcohol in society, and that it's legal and so on. Of course, governments are dependent on the excise that they derive from it. And she says, an excellent discussion, and thanks for organising it. She says, I've purchased the book. What recommendations can Pamela make to conduct further research in Australia? That's a big one, but this is a very high-powered academic person, Rosanna.
I think the most important thing that an academic could do is to call into question the studies that are being funded by the Australian and the United States government. And the Australian, actually, some of the studies in Australia have been funded by the United States government on marijuana, and to ask where the results are and why they haven't published them and what they did with the money. Because there's so many studies that are being done, because the industry throws $1 million at a university, and then you get a headline in a newspaper. Like there was one the other day, and it was like CBD for knee pain or something. Well, it's $1 million for the industry. It's called an ad campaign, and they throw it at a university. They throw a couple of grad students in there, because I see this stuff. They actually have a couple of grad students who are actually sitting in their company boardroom, and then they never publish, they never recruit, they never do anything. They take the money. And Dr. Bertha Madras from Harvard, this is one of her issues I have heard. We need to start to go after the industry. When you see a study like that being done that you think is questionable, you need to go and follow it like I do, and then go, where is the study? Like there was one in Canada this week. He said he hadn't been able to get hold of any marijuana, so he didn't recruit anybody. He took the money in 2018. We're talking like $500,000. And he hadn't been able to recruit people for his study, right? He probably got some money from the industry too. So who's auditing all these studies? If you're not going to publish and you were paid public fund money, you should be publishing or giving your money back. And we need to start tracking these, because they're buying $1 million headlines for studies that aren't being done. And that's corrupt, and that needs to stop. And this University of Washington study is one that I follow really carefully. And there's other ones too, that if they ever were to publish anything, we would all be over it like glue, because they're questionable, really questionable how they've been going about their studies. And I think that that's something, if I was an academic, I'd be in there. I actually would contact Dr. Bertha Madras from Harvard and ask her about it, because she keeps a list apparently. And that's what needs to happen, because I think you'll all agree, money should be spent on research that's going to do some benefit. And we have tons of research on marijuana, and don't let anybody say we don't. And if you need to look it up, just go to PubMed, it's all there. And I know Dr. Philip Drum and I ran all the numbers, and it's like something like $5 billion they've spent on studies of marijuana.
Yes, this is when it starts to feel like an asymmetric war. So we have to be, if we don't have the hypersonic missiles, we need some pretty good drones in terms of modern warfare terms we've learnt about this year. And I just wanted to say that Rosanna has come back with a little comment while you were speaking, and she's gone, wow, a very drawn out wow. Her response has created profound concerns. And the person who you referred to, I'm going to ask Pamela if you could write that down in an email to me, and I'll forward that on to Rosanna, because that's something that we can have further dialogue about. I want to go now to Karen, and she said, thank you, Pamela, for all that you're doing to fight for our youth. As a drug and alcohol awareness educator in Melbourne and a person with a wild personal drug story, I have much opposition to my work and my position in demand reduction. At times I think, what's the point? However, your words reminding us to use what we have to keep up the fight have encouraged me to keep going. I'm convinced every presentation I deliver must save at least one life. For every single life, it is worth it.
Mm-hmm.
If you have any advice on how to open more doors sharing my educational and personal words of warning, I'll be most grateful. God bless. And that's Karen. Thank you very much, Karen, for that contribution.
Yes, thank you.
And she said, P.S. I've contacted multiple politicians. They generally say, we're doing a great job, quote unquote. Now, this is why I'm very pleased that this has been recorded, because I'm hoping many politicians, in the quiet of their own time, actually take this on board. And this is a wake-up call for anybody who's feeling well-informed but hasn't joined the dots or complacent, dangerously so. Just a moment. Here's a question from Queensland from Gabrielle. Following the recent defeat of legalization of marijuana in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Arkansas, what strategies were employed to achieve this? Thank you, Gabrielle.
It would be the demographics, because it would just be the demographics in those states that are not as liberal and more of a conservative state, like Arkansas, and different values, I think, religion and family and all of those things, more so than an out and out campaign. Although I know the doctors in Arkansas, I know a few years ago, they were very, very active and did a lot of social media and a lot of videos and all these kind of things. We did do some outreach from media in those states, but I don't know if that would have, it's really hard to tell, right? If somebody was working that really well and got to people. But no, it's the political scene is really, I think, where it has to change. And I know we certainly, if you look at, history, these people come along who understand it and can turn things around for us. You just need to find those people.
Yes, we've got to get some strong leaders. We need a few Ron DeSantis on the case, I think.
Well, I think you need somebody who can look at their, can say, like, well, you're planning on being a grandfather because your child's using, your 18-year-old son's using marijuana, and sit them down and show them the science. Like, seriously, send them 5 or 6 studies and say, and the government of Canada is saying you shouldn't use this if you want to have children. Like, like, I keep coming back to that point, but like, wow, what a statement. Like, or, I mean, heart or mental health, and everybody should be screened. Like the United States government, I was on a webinar this week with them and at the FDA, and the FDA was saying that we should be screening women for pregnancy before they're given marijuana for medical purposes. And I went, well, that would be really good, guys. That we should have done that a long time ago, like screening. Like the question about how do we stop legalization? Well, we could say, that you need to be screened, like a REMS or a Rev Aid program, like you are for thalidomide and other drugs that are still used for conditions. But people who are given thalidomide are screened for pregnancy and all these different things. So with marijuana, people should be screened for mental health, heart, liver, kidney, pregnancy, reproductive health issues, testicular cancer, all these things. And then if we're screened and we find these people, then we can do data on them too. So I think a REMS program is a really good solution. And it's the pharmaceutical model for drugs that have these side effect profiles. And we have the side effect profiles because of Epidiolex, CBD, and Marinol and Sativex. We've got the side effect profiles. So I just think a REMS program would be a great idea. We tried to push that in Canada, but we didn't get anywhere. But the FDA was talking about it for pregnancy, which would be great.
Yes, we're getting close to time for this broadcast, Pamela. I just want to put one other question to you. Medical researchers here, one of whom you've referred to, Professor Stuart Rees, and his colleague, Dr. Gary Holtz, have found that cannabis use is linked to many childhood and adult cancers. Do you think this research will help change the position of the pro-cannabis lobbyist? And what I want to do before you respond, I just want to draw the attention to the audience that in this current copy of News Weekly, they have had the foresight and the wisdom to publish this article from Dr. Stuart Rees, and it's Cannabis for Child Palliative Care, another very bad idea. So that's by Stuart Rees in the current issue of News Weekly, and we commend News Weekly for publishing that. So I'll just go through the question again. They've found that cannabis use is linked to many childhood and adult cancers. Do you think this research will help change the position of the pro-cannabis lobbyists?
I would say no, for the reason that we've had that for quite some time. And the United States government in California, the office there has had marijuana smoke as a carcinogenic for years and toxic to reproductive health for years. And the Canadian government has all this stuff. We need to you can't just go out there with that, because they're just going to say, oh, sugar causes cancer in children, or tobacco, they just deflect, they just come up. You have to connect with the audience you're talking. So if you go to, like, if you're going to go to a pro-life, the pro-life movement is extremely well organized and funded. If you were to go to them with the pregnancy, that marijuana use increases stillborn, abortion, spontaneous abortion, miscarriage, they're interested in that. You need to pick, you go to the insurance companies and say driving high makes, causes costs to your insurance. You need to connect the right audience to the right message. If you just go out there, it's not enough. It's, however sad that is, it's not enough, because they just deflect, and they have campaigns. They've got it out there saying it probably helps something. Well, look at the epilepsy. Look what they did with Charlotte's Web. They said it cured epilepsy. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. So it caused seizures. It actually caused seizures.
Pamela, we always like to assure our audience that we'll keep to things being timely, and it being Saturday. I might just say one or two things. First and foremost, on behalf of everybody, and I want to thank those who have sent in questions, and people they've got quite excited by your response and sent through follow-up answers as well, and there's quite a volume of material here. I will probably get them to you, and I want to say this, that because the response has been so strong and with a lot of enthusiasm, and you've obviously enlightened a lot of people, and I thank you for your messaging, where you have encouraged, particularly the Drug Advisory Council, that is largely made up of volunteers, and many of the organisations in the anti-drug space are made up of volunteers, with one or two pro bono professional services thrown in and one or two people retained. So in terms of motivating a volunteer force, you have made some really profound comments in that everybody can help, even in the most simple, humble way. They can be grandparents having a conversation around a family table, simple letter writing to newspapers, beefing up what they have to say on social media. There's so many ways, and people coming to make a contribution. Now, what I'd like to do is talk further and get feedback from people here in Melbourne, where we arrange a different kind of meeting, more of a Zoom-oriented meeting where people can participate, and we can do a little bit of a workshop, and we might plan to do that early next year in February, and we'll get some of the people who value your contribution, and I'm hoping inspired by what you had to say and the points that you made, and we'll move to that. And I just want to foreshadow to everybody, I put to Pamela, would she consider getting another edition of the Pied Pipers of Pot out there for publication, and would she work with the Drug Advisory Council when we're in a position to do so with the appropriate degree of corporate sponsorship to promote her book actively through professional publicity campaigns and a national speaking tour here in Australia. Now, those of who are watching, if you can give me your feedback to that notion, I'd be in your debt and a little bit thrilled to get your feedback. This is what I would like to do during 2023 with Pamela. Pamela is publishing or launching another book, and she'll be in New York for 3 weeks in a few days' time. And this is why we're building our relationship, a bridge from now, letting people have a happy and a holy Christmas, and picking up things in a workmanlike fashion early in the new year. So, Pamela, we are in your debt. We admire you greatly. We thank you for your contribution today. And we thank you for what you are doing, because from my point of view, on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, you have inspired me. I use your book as my touchstone. We have an entity called Touchstone, which is emblazoned behind me, which is our support service for the families of the drug users and the drug affected and those who might have died of drug addiction. And I often quote your book. I think it's a profound book. I recommend it to everybody. And
thank you.
That's a very valuable contribution that will echo down through the decades, Pamela. I wish you good health and strength and resolve and clarity, and above all, safety in your odyssey and all of the campaigning that you are doing to bring this invaluable information to save not only the people of Canada, the people of North America in general, and that Australians will pick up and learn the lessons. We just don't want to be in a terrible pit of despair because we didn't see all of the warning signs, and join the dots and read between the lines and understand that if there's a path and it's follow the money path, that's the answer. And we really want to arrest the movement that is pushing the acceptance and the use and the legalization of marijuana. We thank you for your work, and we offer many blessings to you here from Melbourne, Victoria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and happy holidays ahead for everybody. I just quickly will say that in 2012, I took out the smoking pipe from Santa in the famous Christmas poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," written in 1822, and this is its 200th anniversary, so that's why I'm in New York. But that was the beginning of this whole journey with marijuana, I guess, 2012, with the whole trip to New York. And I was called a literary vandal by the American Library Association, and I was spoofed by Stephen Colbert, a major American late night talk show host in New York. And I went to a book signing, and a man picked up one of my books and called me a heretic and hit me over the head because I had dared to take the smoking out of Santa's, take away his pipe. So it's a crazy world out there, but you just do what you do and be true to yourself and go out there with the facts and go there out there with science and don't play their game, just tell it like it is and we'll win. We will.
Pamela, there are people out there who I'm sure believe in the power of prayer, and I'm hoping they will take the time to pray for your safety as you move forward in your work. Thank you very much,
Thanks.
Pamela. I'll be in contact with you on other fronts, and thank you for today.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye.